Alright, today we're going to learn how to replace the top end on our 02 to 06 Honda CRF 450. First, we're going to take off the seat by removing the bolts on each side of the bike by using a 10mm socket or a T-handle. Something to keep in mind throughout the rest of the video is to keep all the parts and hardware organized so that you don't get confused when reassembling. Slide the seat back so that it clears the front slot and remove it. Next, use an 8mm socket to remove the bolts securing the tank cover to the radiators. Make sure the fuel petcock is turned to the off position. Then, with the help of a pair of needle nose pliers, gently remove the fuel line from the petcock. Using an 8mm socket, remove the bolt securing the petcock to the frame. Use an 8mm socket to remove the bolts securing the right-hand tank cover. Using the 8mm socket, remove the remaining bolt securing the tank to the frame. Remove the clip which secures the rear of the tank to the frame. Then pull the fuel tank breather hose out of the steering stem. Carefully feed the petcock through the frame and remove the fuel tank from the bike. Next, we're going to remove the right side panel. Use an 8mm socket to remove the right side cover lower bolt. Slide the right panel back and remove it. Now we're going to remove the muffler. Use a 10mm socket to loosen the top muffler hanger bolt. Next, use a 12mm socket to remove the last muffler bolt. My bike has an aftermarket muffler which doesn't use a band clamp to clamp the muffler to the head pipe. Yours probably does, so go ahead and loosen the band clamp. Once you've got the band clamp loose, pull straight back on the muffler and gently twist from side to side until the muffler slides off. We're going to remove the head pipe next. The head pipe nuts can be tricky, so you may need to experiment and use a combination of extensions, socket lengths, or a U-joint drive to help loosen them if you don't have a nice T-handle. Once you've got the nuts off, pull the flange back off the studs and remove the head pipe. Don't forget to remove the gasket too. Next on the list of items to remove is the rear subframe. Start by using a 12mm socket to loosen the lower right subframe bolt. Transition to the left side of the bike and use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen the hose clamp securing the airbox boot to the carburetor. Disconnect the breather hose from the airbox. My bike happens to be missing the spring clip, but I'm assuming yours will be equipped with one, so grab a pair of needle nose pliers to help you move the clip off the barb. Proceed to use a 12mm socket to remove the left lower subframe bolt. Use a 10mm socket to remove the remaining rear subframe bolt. Rest firmly on the rear subframe and pull straight back until the airbox boot is no longer secured to the carburetor. Keep your eye out for the airbox hose clamp as it has a tendency to come off as you remove the rear subframe. Disconnect the TPS sensor plug. Look carefully where my fingers are on my left hand and notice my left thumb pushing down on the catch tab as I pull the plugs apart. Once again, my spring clip is missing on my breather hose, but I suspect your bike will have a spring clip here. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to help you pull the clip off the barb. Tuck the hose out of the way. I secured my stator wires to my fuel line with a zip tie. You might not have this, but if you do, use the appropriate tool to unsecure the wires. Push the fuel line through the guide on the frame and rotate the tube out of the way. Use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen the hose clamp securing the carburetor to the cylinder head. Pull straight back on the carburetor until it dislodges from the intake manifold. Once the carburetor is free, watch carefully as I slide the carb to the side and up so that I can gain easy access to the throttle and hot start cables. Be gentle and take your time as you bring the carb up. As you tilt the carb, some fuel may want to drain out, so have a catch pan at the ready. Before we go any further, we're going to put a clean rag in the intake manifold to help keep any dirt or debris from getting into the cylinder head. Use a small flathead screwdriver to slide the hot start boot back from the cable. My hot start plastic fitting stripped a long time ago, so I machined one from aluminum and will use a pair of vice grips to loosen it. If you still have the plastic fitting, grab the appropriate size open end wrench or carefully use a pair of pliers to loosen it. Once loose, remove the hot start cable from the carburetor and tuck it out of the way. Turn the carburetor over onto its other side. We're now going to remove the Allen head bolt securing the cable cover to the carburetor. Use a 4mm Allen wrench to loosen the bolt. Remove the cover by pulling it straight up and away from the carb. Now we need to remove the throttle cables. Use a 10mm open-end wrench to loosen the first cable. Loosen it just enough so that you can slide the cable end out of the slot. Rotate the cable around so that the cable aligns with the notch in the wheel and pull the ball out. Loosen the second cable with the 10mm wrench until the cable end clears the slot in the carburetor. Once out, rotate the cable until it aligns with the slot in the cable wheel and pull the ball end out. Now that the carburetor is free, we can set it aside. Pull the throttle cables through the frame as shown and tuck them aside along with the radiator vent hose. Gently pull up on the spark plug cap and move it to the side out of the way. Next, we're going to remove the cylinder head cover. If your head cover is excessively dirty, now is a good time to clean it. This will prevent any dirt on the head cover from dislodging upon removal and falling into the cylinder head. Use a 10mm socket to remove the 3 bolts securing the cylinder head cover to the cylinder head. Once the bolts are loose, pull straight up on the cylinder head cover and remove it. Use a Phillips bit socket or screwdriver to remove the cam chain tensioner cap screw. Next, you'll want to use your do-it-yourself cam chain tensioner tool. Feel free to pause the video and reference this frame or use the provided instructions in your download to create your own cam chain tensioner tool. Using your cam chain tensioner stopper tool, turn the tool clockwise to take the tension off the cam chain. The DIY tool can easily slip out of the slot, so I like to use a pair of pliers to help keep it positioned as I twist. Once you can no longer turn the tensioner any further with the tool, push the tool forward into the slot so that it stays in place. Remove the crankshaft hole cap by using a 10mm Allen head socket. We're now going to position the piston and crankshaft at top dead center so that none of the valves are open. Use an 8mm Allen head socket or T-handle to rotate the crankshaft so that the punch mark on the crank gear comes into alignment with the mark on the right hand cover. As you can see, this also aligns the slotted mark on the cam gear to the arrow on the cylinder head. Next, we'll remove the cam gear. Use a 6mm Allen head socket to loosen the cam gear bolts while simultaneously using an 8mm Allen head socket to keep the crankshaft from rotating. Once the first bolt is removed, rotate the crankshaft until the second bolt becomes easily accessible. Remove the second cam gear bolt. Once you have removed the bolt, take great care not to unintentionally dislodge the gear off the camshaft, causing it to drop down into the engine. Carefully move the gear out of the way from the cam, lower it slightly, and pull the chain off of it. Notice how my left hand has a hold of the cam chain from the other side. Don't worry about securing the cam chain, as it is not necessary. If you happen to lose a bolt down into the engine, try to fish it out using a pen magnet before proceeding so that you don't forget about it. Now, we're going to remove the cam carrier. Use a 10mm socket to loosen the 4 cam carrier bolts evenly in a crisscross pattern. By using a crisscross pattern, the pressure on the mating surfaces of the cam carrier and cylinder head is relieved evenly, and the chances of any warping of the cam carrier is minimized. Once loosened, carefully take each of the bolts out and set them aside. The cam carrier is located to the head with a pair of dowel pins. Gently lift straight up on the carrier and wiggle it from front to back if it doesn't pull up right away. Be careful not to apply too much lateral force as you pull up, because this will lighten the chances of the dowel pinholes enlarging, making the fit more sloppy the next time around. Use a pen magnet to pull each shim away from its keeper, then use a pair of calipers or a 0 to 1 inch micrometer to measure the thickness of each shim. After that, record your measurements in their respective locations on your worksheet so that you can easily keep track of where the shims came from. This way you'll have a good starting point when you either check your original clearances or reshim the head after installing new valves. Continue to remove, measure, and label on your diagram the thickness and location of each shim. The buckets are mated sliding parts and should not be interchanged, so it's important to keep track of them. Set your diagram with your shim measurements, shims, and buckets aside until we need them for reassembling the top end of the engine. Once we've got our cam carrier and shim situated, remove the left side engine guard using a 10mm socket. We're now ready to drain the coolant from the engine. Use an 8mm socket to loosen the coolant drain bolt. Have a catch container at the ready to catch the coolant as it comes out. Remove the radiator cap so the coolant system can fully drain. Once all the coolant has drained, reinstall the coolant drain bolt using your 8mm socket. Torque the drain bolt to 10 Nm. Reinstall the radiator cap. Use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen the upper hose clamp securing the radiator hose to the cylinder head. Pull the hose off the head and tighten the clamp back around the hose so you don't misplace it. We're going to loosen the rear engine mount bolt using a 14mm socket and open-end wrench. Reach around the back side of the bike and position your open-end wrench on the engine mount nut. Remove the nut, but leave the bolt in for the moment. It will be easier to pull the bolt through once the upper engine mount hangers are loosened. Use a 12mm socket to remove the two left side upper engine mount hanger bolts. Remove the 14mm nut and pull the bolt, fuel line guide, hanger, and spacer out. Be sure to catch the opposite side spacer as you pull the bolt out. Next, transition to the right side and remove the right side engine mount hanger using a 12mm socket. Use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen the hose clamp securing the coolant hose to the water pump outlet. Proceed to loosen the hose clamp securing the coolant hose to the right radiator. Pull both hoses off their respective fittings. Move to the left side of the bike and loosen the remaining hose clamp securing the coolant hose to the left radiator using a Phillips screwdriver. Grasp the left radiator and pull the coolant hose off the fitting. Remove the trio of coolant hoses from the engine, set them aside, and make sure you have all the corresponding hose clamps. Use an 8mm socket to loosen the left exterior cylinder head bolts. Use a 14mm socket to loosen the cylinder head nuts evenly in a crisscross pattern. Using a crisscross pattern will relieve pressure on the cylinder head and cylinder mating surfaces in a gradual, even way, reducing the chances of the head warping. Once the pressure is off the nuts, go ahead and fully loosen them. I find it easiest to use a pen magnet to grab the nuts and washers once they're loose. Before we can get the head out, we'll have to remove the ignition coil. Use an 8mm socket to remove the lower ignition coil bolt. The upper ignition coil bolt uses a nut to secure it. Use a 10mm wrench to hold the nut in place while you use the 8mm socket to loosen the bolt. Pull the ignition coil away from the frame and gently pull the wire off the coil. Grasp the cylinder head at the front and rear and gently pull up on the head. The head has two dowel pins aligning it with the cylinder, so it will need to be pulled straight up. You may need to wiggle the head back and forth a little bit to help free it up. Once free, watch carefully as I slide the head up and maneuver it out of the frame. Take your time and be gentle as you remove the head. Use an 8mm socket to remove the bolt on the left side of the cylinder. Remove the cylinder head gasket. Pull the cam chain guide out. Pull the cylinder straight up. Once you've got the cylinder on its way up, position one of your hands underneath the cylinder so that you can catch the piston assembly as it becomes free. Grab a couple clean shop rags and put them around the rod at the crankcase base. This will cushion the rod as you set it aside and keep parts and dirt out of your engine. Remove the cylinder dowel pins from the crankcase. Pull up and remove the base gasket. Here I'm just adding one more rag to help support the piston assembly and help keep parts out of the bottom end. Next, we're going to remove the right hand piston pin circlip. Pay careful attention to my technique here. Insert a pick in the dimpled hole in the piston so you can get the pick behind the circlip. At the same time, use the middle finger on your left hand to push against the piston pin so that the clip can't work its way back into the piston bore. Once you've got the pick behind the circlip, use your thumb on your left hand to hold it in place while you come in with a pair of needle nose pliers using your right hand. Be careful here, as the circlip has a tendency to fly away. While you won't be reusing it, you should make sure it doesn't fly into the lower end of your engine if you lose hold of it. Depending how worn your top end is, you may or may not be able to push the piston pin through by hand. The engine I'm working on has a lot of time on it and I can't get the piston pin out by hand, so I'm going to pick up a socket that matches the piston pin OD, an extension, and a mallet to help push the pin out. I really don't like to put much lateral force on the rod bearing or crank bearings, so I'm not going to pound real hard. You'll also notice how my left hand is supporting the lower portion of the piston and rod, absorbing most of the blow of the mallet and minimizing the amount of lateral force being applied to the lower end bearings. We don't have to pound the piston pin all the way out, just far enough so it is clear of the rod. Here we can see why the piston pin didn't come out easily. As the piston reciprocated up and down, a groove started to wear into the piston where the pin was. You can see the edge that was formed as I dragged my pick across it. Next, we're going to inspect the cylinder. Apart from a little glazing, my cylinder bore doesn't look too bad. A lot of the cross hatching is still there, and there are no deep scratches that a fresh honing won't get rid of. As I move my pick, you can see some of the deeper vertical marks that the hone job will take care of. I'm going to show you how to hone your own cylinder. Now I understand not all of you will have your own hone to do this or feel comfortable tackling this job. That's okay, and I would recommend taking your cylinder to a professional to have it honed if you won't be doing it yourself. A fresh hone is essential as it allows the rings to seat properly, so I wouldn't recommend skipping this step. If you're still watching and want to hone your cylinder yourself, the first thing you will want to do is mask off the top surface of the cylinder with duct tape. The duct tape protects the top edges of the cylinder and keeps it from rounding as the hone passes in and out. I like to use the tough Gorilla duct tape for this. Without the tape, you will likely create a radius on the top edge, which is not good. Cover all four sides and then use a razor blade to trim the tape from the cylinder bore. Apply a generous amount of honing oil to the cylinder bore and spread it around with your fingers. Position the cylinder on its flattest side so it's easy to hold on to. Apply a generous amount of honing oil to the hone itself. Once you've applied the oil, use your hand to spread the oil all over the hone. As you spin the drill, a lot of oil will fling off, so this gets pretty messy and you'll want to make sure you don't have anything important in the surrounding area. Thanks for watching the beginning of our top-end rebuild video for the Honda CRF 450. To view the rest of the video and support DIY Moto Fix, click the link provided.
By supporting our videos, you make it possible for us to continue bringing rebuild knowledge to dirt bike enthusiasts. The rest of the top-end rebuild video pack includes continued step-by-step instruction on honing your cylinder, measuring and inspecting the cylinder, piston, and cylinder head, detailed instruction on how to diagnose a problematic cylinder head, how to correctly install new valves and rebuild the head, valve shimming guidance, and step-by-step reassembly instruction. In addition, we provide downloadable PDFs which thoroughly cover all the necessary Honda service specifications, the applicable torque specs, a parts list detailing what you may need to replace, a complete tool list, and a follow-along worksheet where you can keep track of your build. The top-end rebuild video pack is instantly downloadable and viewable on your desktop or mobile phone in a matter of minutes, allowing you to start fixing your bike immediately. So click the link provided to continue wrenching on your CRF 450.